accepting Bitcoin in your business. Now, on the internet, it's fairly simple to do a transaction with Bitcoin. We get a QR code, we scan it, or we have the address, we pipe it into our client, and we transfer the Bitcoin. Done deal. The network verifies that within 10 minutes, and we're off to the races. But how does that exactly translate to a brick and mortar facility? Like, for example, we have a business and we have customers and we're doing transactions with them. How do we make it easy for us and them in a brick and mortar environment to do those transactions? That's what we're going to talk about in this nugget. Let's begin. I'd like you to imagine that you and I are in business together and we own a restaurant. And my goodness, the restaurant is doing great. The food is great. The service is great. Customers are just standing in line to get in. They love it. And we're making money. That's what business is all about. It's the process of making a profit and generating revenue. Well, for people who come into our restaurant and when they go to pay their bill, if we're in the United States, we currently use the dollar. And if they don't have cash, they might use a debit card or a credit card. And the reason we accept various different credit cards is because we want these people's business. So if they're using a Discover or American Express or MasterCard or Visa or Diners Club or whatever, it's very likely we're going to accept a lot of different credit cards because we want their business. Now, it is true, on the back end, we do pay some fees and processing fees for allowing the customers to use those cards, but it's okay. We build that into our business plan, and we're happy to do it because we want the business. Now, let's take a look at some additional things that we could do to improve our business. Number one, accepting Bitcoin could be good for business for several reasons. Number one, maybe we've got customers who are looking for a restaurant that accepts Bitcoin. If we accept Bitcoin, perhaps we'll even get new customers as a result. There's some other benefits too. For example, if somebody pays with a credit card and it's a stolen card that hasn't been turned in yet or reported yet, what happens with that transaction? Does it get reversed? Does the credit card company eat it? Well, we don't even have to ask that question. With Bitcoin, there's no identity theft. If somebody has the private keys that authorize the transfer of Bitcoin from one address to another, they can authorize that transfer and it's done. The other cool thing is there's no chargebacks at all with Bitcoin. Once that transaction is sent out to the Bitcoin network, the miners verify that transaction. It becomes part of the blockchain as a permanent record of Bitcoin transactions. It's not reversible. The person can't come back and say, oh, I need that money back. I'd like you to give it to me. It's one way, which is great for us. Maybe not as great for the client, but that's great for us because we don't have to worry about any chargebacks with Bitcoin. We're also going to have smaller transaction fees, and that's a reality. Now, we may or may not want to do Bitcoin on our own, meaning we may not want to do all the lookups of the current exchange rate and calculate the currency to Bitcoin at the moment to find out what the customer owes us. But if we did it on our own, which we'll take a look at here in a moment, the transaction fees are very, very teeny because at the moment, the Bitcoin network is rewarding miners by releasing Bitcoin for all the work that they're doing. Now, in several years, as all the Bitcoin is released, there will be slightly higher transaction fees, but they won't be anywhere close to the 1 or 2% that we're paying now for bank fees for credit card processing. They'll be very, very small compared to that. So we're going to have smaller fees compared to bigger fees, and that's another benefit of using Bitcoin. So let's take a look at how we might do this on our own. And I'll tell you what, if our restaurant is really busy, it's very likely that doing it all on our own doesn't make too much sense. Now, Keith, what do you mean, do it on your own? Well, with Bitcoin, all we really need is an address. So if the bill for this customer was $100 US and the current exchange rate was $22 US, I'll take that. That was somewhere in the last 3 or 4 days. It was $22. And then our Bitcoin would be 4.55. So we get out our QR code and we show it to the customer saying the bill is 4.55 Bitcoin. The customer, with their PDA, they scan that QR code, they put in 4.55, they click on send, and that authorizes the transfer of 4.55 Bitcoin over to us from them. Fantastic. Now, what normally happens at that point? Once you pay your bill, normally at a restaurant, I would get up and I would leave. However, there's a slight problem with Bitcoin is that it might take 10 or more minutes for that transaction to actually be confirmed, just for the Bitcoin network to validate that double spending hasn't occurred and everything else. So what do we do with that customer for 10 minutes? Do we hold them in their seat? Do we say, have another mint, don't leave yet, it hasn't been confirmed yet? Those are awkward questions. But the actual processing, the looking up of the exchange rate, the calculating it, and then the waiting 10 minutes doesn't really bode well for a transaction environment where customers are used to paying and then leaving. So it's very likely that we are going to use a third-party service. And this third-party service, there may be a small fee involved with that. But let me point this out. Even if the fee was exactly the same as it is with our credit cards, the benefits of not having to worry about identity theft and not having to worry about chargebacks, that would be enough reason to be also willing to accept Bitcoin. So maybe you're not going to make additional money from using Bitcoin, but the security of the chargebacks not coming back to get you is a fantastic thing. So we'll pay a slight fee. Now, what's that third-party service going to do for us? Number one, they're going to give us some really sweet apps. These apps could be something like, okay, the bill was $100. So the waiter walking up with his tablet simply says $100, hands it to the customer. It's already converted over to a QR code that customer can scan. We also could have services where we're rotating our addresses. So if you don't want to receive on the same exact address every single time, you could have the system automatically generate a new address for each and every customer. That way, nobody could look at one address and say, oh, this guy got $10 million of income to this address. Whoever's looking at the blockchain I'm talking about couldn't see that because they're spread across multiple addresses. So the first benefit of using a third-party service would be some killer apps involved. That would make all that conversion real time. A second thing we would expect from a third-party service is some type of a assume the risk position. For example, if this customer does the transfer of 4.55 Bitcoin over to us, and then they leave, and if by chance there was a double spend involved and the Bitcoin network didn't accept that as a valid transaction, who assumes that risk? And if I'm using a third-party service as a merchant, I would hope that that third-party service is going to assume that risk as one of the benefits of using that third-party service. Now, whether all third-party services do that or not, based on how they operate, that would be a question to ask your third-party service. The other thing I'd like to know I'd like to have from a third-party service is, what about the Bitcoin? Now, if they transfer 4.55 Bitcoin over to us, this customer, and it's now over in our wallet, what do we want to have done with that? Do we want to have it cashed out into local fiat currency? Do we want to save it as Bitcoin? If we are going to transfer it over to fiat currency, do we want to have that happen once a day at the end of the day? Or do we want to have it done on a per transaction basis? And it's the actual movement of Bitcoin to local currency where there's always a fee. I just haven't found a place yet that doesn't charge some kind of a fee for converting it. So maybe the 1.5% is right there where it gets converted. So if you're a business and you want to keep it as Bitcoin, the fees again could be way, way lower. If you want those transactions immediately swept over to local fiat currency, maybe it costs 1.5 or 1.9 or whatever percentage you've arranged with that third-party vendor. So maybe a third-party company would take every transaction based on the time it occurred, that individual transaction, and what the exchange rate was at that moment. And at the end of the day, they sweep all the Bitcoin from your account and they send you the local fiat currency based on when that transaction happened. And so they could assume the risk regarding any type of fluctuation during the day. All we know is that we're paying 1.5 or 1.9 or some other percentage point, and we're simply getting the transaction as our local currency. So with a third-party service, whether it's a credit card and we're paying the 1.5 to 2%, or we have a Bitcoin third-party service and we're paying a conversion rate as we convert Bitcoin over to our local fiat currency, there is going to be some fees involved for that piece of it. However, check this out. The benefits of no identity theft and no chargebacks are huge, above and beyond the defaults that we would normally get with a credit card company. As an example of a really cool third-party company that can assist us as a merchant in handling Bitcoin transactions is this company called BitPay. Let me show you how simple this is. So let's say this is on at our register and the customer comes up, they want to pay their bill. The person at the desk clicks on checkout now and there's an order number they can type in. Let's say it's $100. And so they type in $100 and say, I want to check out now. That's it. Now it brings up a QR code. And in this QR code, it has all the details for 4.0739 Bitcoin. The person scans this, that Bitcoin is transferred, and the customer's on their way. And because this is set up through my merchant account, that money is going to an address associated with that merchant account. And at the end of the day, based on my instructions for BitPay, they'll either sweep it all to my local currency, or they'll go ahead and keep it and store it for me as Bitcoin, or transfer it to the address that I want them to send it to. The options are totally mine. Again, it's usually the conversion between Bitcoin and whatever fiat currency you're going to. That's where normally the biggest fees are going to be incurred. Another really sweet feature is this in-person payment tool. If I click here and we go to mobile checkout, check this out. So let's say our wait staff has mobile phones or mobile devices of some Androids or iOS devices, and they click on mobile checkout. All they need to do to set up their mobile phone to receive Bitcoin is do this: customize my mobile app. So here, the wait staff, all they need to do is have their mobile app. They scan this, so it runs the BitPay application, and then they can go ahead and put the information for the customer. For example, the bill was $100. Here's the order number. They hit a button. It generates the QR code on their mobile device, and they can bring it to the table. Then the customer can scan it with their mobile device, make the payment, and of course, notifications can be sent for every transaction that occurs. They also have options for deposit cards, a mobile buy now, event tickets, so you can make it super easy to do business. And then BitPay in the background is doing all the conversion between whatever your local currency is, all the money that goes into your merchant account at the end of the day. It can be swept out to local currency if you want to, or you can have it forwarded as Bitcoin to whatever wallet address that you want it to be forwarded to. They also have a complete suite of tools that can work with our web pages if we're doing business over the internet. In fact, I've heard people mention that Bitcoin is the currency for the internet. So they put the easiest options up here, and then you scroll down to the more difficult options down below. But things like online catalog items, the buy now option, internet donations, client billing. For example, let's see how easy that is. So for client billing, if we wanted to bill a client, we say, great, I want to go ahead and create a new bill. And other options that make it very easy to do a transaction, whether it's online or face-to-face with a mobile device. In this nugget, we've taken a look at some of the benefits of accepting Bitcoin to increase our business and to avoid chargebacks of any type. We also identified that it might be kind of challenging in a busy environment to do manual transactions, to look up the exchange rate on our own and process the transaction and wait for it to complete. And that's why we're going to find a lot of companies using third-party services like BitPay to help facilitate and make it easy on both your staff at the business and the customer. I've had a lot of fun. I appreciate you joining me. I hope this information has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.